In this video, we are going to get into detail and deep dive to understand Azure Policy and how you can implement Azure policies to achieve better governance of infrastructure in Azure. We begin with the basic understanding of Azure Policy, the need and the purpose of the Azure policies before getting into the key terminologies that are used in when defining and maintaining an Azure policy. We then get into details to understand the process of how to define a policy, assign and monitor for the governance purpose. We also look into how to implement or integrate DevOps into Azure Policy to automate your governance and monitoring. Then we get into the practical side of it to understand what are the extensions available in Visual Studio Code and, and then a detailed hands-on sessions on various aspects of policy definition, assignment, and remediation. Before getting deep dive into Azure policy and hands-on, let's spend few minutes to understand how Azure policy play a key role in infrastructure governance in Azure, giving better control to administrators and developers when creating infrastructure on cloud. Let's say you start with a new greenfield project to move a legacy application into Azure cloud. The architect has done all the solution and finalized the infrastructure components required for the Azure infrastructure. Business have reviewed and given an approval for the project. Now, the team has started to build the application and create the required infrastructure in Azure. There are multiple ways for the team to create the infrastructure in Azure. The team can use Azure Portal to manually create the infrastructure and configure the required SKUs. They could use the CLI or the PowerShell scripts to generate the script to achieve a semi-automated approach for infrastructure creation. They could use the ARM template for a more declarative approach for defining and deploying infrastructure. And they could also implement the infrastructure as a code capabilities to enable better maintenance at scale. And for a fully automated approach, they could even integrate these scripts with the DevOps for an end-to-end Azure infrastructure creation and maintenance. With all these aspects available and developer teams involved, there is always a chance of a misconfiguration or an unnecessary resource being created, which directly impacts the cost in Azure. It is required for the administrators and the management to ensure the cost is not shooting up due to unnecessary resources created. Azure Policy comes into picture to help you to define a set of rules and conditions that needs to be checked for every resource and apply those conditions and or modify the resource for the conditions. The conditions could be not allowing to create a particular resource on a location where the application need not be, a region, blocking a region to be selected, a particular escape to be selected, so various other scenarios. Azure Policy will help you to define these business rules and configure or convert it across the managing group or subscriptions, meaning all the resources under the subscription or the managing group would get these policies applied and give you a better compliance and auditing report to help you understand the details. And Azure Policy is one of the service provided for Azure governance from resource creation and management. Azure Policy allows and ensures a proper resource type and SKUs are chosen and provide a better control over costing of the resources. Azure Policy can also collate information across the organization and provide better monitoring and reporting uh, purpose. The business rules are described in a policy definition, which are then assigned at various scopes such as management group, a subscription group, a resource group, or in some cases, the resource itself. Let's quickly look at few of the terms that we generally hear and need to understand an Azure policy better. Our policy definition is a JSON object that describes an Azure policy. The Azure policy typically includes a set of parameters and a logical condition. Finally, the action or the effect that needs to be taken based on the condition's result. An initiative, also known as a policy set, is a collection of policy definitions with a common goal. So this is where you can group a set of policies and into an initiative to help you achieve a common organization goal. A scope defines relevancy of the policy against the assignment to a management group, resource group, or a resource. Enforcement is defined in the policy definition as a preventive behavior based on the effects of the policy. An event is an incident or an outcome when a policy changes take effect. These events can be passed down to an event grid or an event hub to help you process these events in real time. Finally, an evaluation is a process of scanning resources and determining the applicability and compliance of the policies against the resources. With these terms and basic understanding, uh, we are now going to get into detail of the process of Azure policy and then finally into the hands-on. Now, let's spend few minutes to understand a typical process of defining the Azure policies and, and assigning the same to get the required auditing and monitoring on the resources. We begin by identifying and defining the business rules required for the organization to manage the infrastructure from cost, monitoring, and auditing point of view. The rules are then described using the policy definition object with the required parameters, actions, and the conditions. Each definition is typically focused on one set of rules with respect to infrastructure or the cost. Then multiple groups are grouped. Then multiple policies are grouped together to have an initiative or a policy set. An initiative can share parameters and can be managed with a single assignment. As we discussed in the previous section, an initiative is focused towards achieving a common goal across the organization or the business unit. The third step would be to assign the policy or the initiative against a scope. A scope could be a subscription, management group, or a particular resource. Once assigned, depending on the condition of the policy, the policy rules would be applied. Evaluation of an existing or a new policy is the process of applying the business rule and identifying the compliant or non-compliant resources. The recommended approach for evaluation is either do an audit of existing resources which are automatically done whenever a policy is assigned. And depending on the condition in the policy of an audit, a new resource would automatically be checked for the conditions. You could finally deploy and monitor the resources using the evaluation option. The final step would be to apply remediation for the non-compliant resources. The remediation tasks remediate the existing resources automatically. For new resource, the remediated when assignment is updated or deployed if not exist tag is applicable. The final step would be to apply the remediation task for non-compliant resources. The remediation is applied for existing resources automatically. For new resources, remediation is taken care when assignment is updated or deploy if not exist tag is applicable in the policy. Now let's quickly look at and understand the policy definition structure and the key fields and properties involved. As we discussed, the policy definition is a JSON object with a declarative fields and the languages. When defining an Azure policy, there are few key fields that we need to include and define for effectiveness. Some of them are the name of the policy, to help you identify when you have multiple policies, the description of the business rule, helping you to know the purpose and the need of this particular definition, the mode, which determines whether this policy is applied across all the resources or only for those which are indexed, the metadata fields, which will include the category of the policy, the versioning, and whether the policy is for preview or in a non-preview mode. It also helps you to define parameters which you can take as an input to the policy definition. The policies, the parameters could be static or they could be dynamic, where you could specify the values at the time of assignment of the policy. Finally, the policy rule object in the policy definition is the core uh, part of the policy definition, wherein you define the logical condition which will be executed to determine the uh, applicability of this particular policy to the resource. So this is where the parameters can be used and write a logical conditions like an if conditions, if not conditions, and then finally define an effect which is typically either an allow or a deny or update a set of properties depending on the parameters. With these key fields and data defined, we will see in our hands-on session how these policies can be defined and assigned in the future state. Now, let's focus on one of the last steps of the policy definition and governance, the remediation structure. Remediation is the process or the task that is used to ensure resources become compliant as per the policies or the initiative. Remediation actions are automatically applied on existing resources whenever a policy is assigned or modified. For new resources, the flag deployed if not exist determines whether to take the action or not. Similar to policy definition, recommended remediation is also a JSON object part of the policy definition. Some of the key fields that you need to be aware when using the remediation is the assignment ID, the unique identifier which determines the policy and assignment to a scope, the policy ID, the unique identifier of a policy itself, the resource count, determining how many of the resources for which this policy to be applied, and the failure threshold, which determines how many failures, what is the threshold of the non-compliant resource that it has to take. Once the remediation task is created, provisioned, and deployed, summary will be auto-populated into the Azure Policy dashboard. Now, as part of the first hands-on session, let's look at how to navigate to Azure Policies and review the basic details and reports when it comes to Azure Policy in Portal. Here I am in Azure Portal, wherein I can go ahead and search for policy and find the service, the Azure Policy listed. Once I reach and get into Azure Policy, I'll get an initial dashboard wherein I'll be able to see the resource compliance and the list of resources and policies that are being assigned or reviewed. You could also look at the individual compliance report, scope it up to the subscription or at resource group level, and also fine tune and filter out the report with respect to the type of the definition, either an initiative or a policy, or filter out by compliant or non-compliant or various other states of the resource. Or you could just search for a particular resource or the details that you're looking for. In either case, it will list down each and every policy and its compliance state and the percentage of compliance of the resources assigned with that particular policy. You could also define and manage the policy definitions, assignments, and exemptions that you want to provide and manage in your infrastructure. The remediation is the section where it will list down all the remediations that have been taken care so far based on the policies that are assigned and scoped. And events are the various activities and actions that have taken care, which can then be passed on to an event grid or an event hub to process as in a real time and handle the issues or the compliance. Now, in the next section, let's look at a detailed view of how to define a policy and how to assign the same using the Azure portal. Now, now let's look at how to define a policy and also look at how do I achieve the required assignments to check for compliance or non-compliance on existing resource. To begin the definition of policies, we need to go to definitions under authoring, and since there are multiple pre-built policy definitions that are available at various categories, it would take a few seconds to load up all the policies that are currently available in Azure portal. Here again, you can filter them based on the definition type, category, or search for a particular name or ID. Now to define a new policy, you could go into the policy definition and begin by identifying the scope of the uh, policy. And you could give it a name that I would give here as add a default tag from the Azure portal. So what we're trying to do in this case is to ensure every resource that is created uh, uh, in the subscription has a default tag of created by and created on. So the policy ensures and checks and ensures every resource has these tags assigned and updated. So adding a default created on tag for every field. And I can also specify the category. Either I can define a new category, I call it as governance. I can define a new category, call it as governance, or use an existing category. Now, in order to define the policy, as we saw in the initial section of the video, we will be able to define the mode of the policy or the applicability and the policy rule, which includes the condition as well as the parameters. Now let me replace with one of my existing policy. So here uh, the policy is to ensure there is a tag added for every resource with the created on time on value. So here the mode is all, which indicates that every resource to which this particular scope is assigned, it will be applicable. And here have defined two parameters, the tag name and the tag value. So the name could be created on, value could be the year, which is 2023. So the policy rule here, first is the condition. The if in this case you have an if condition which is checking whether the current resource already has a tag with the same name as what the created on. If and exists, it checks whether it is existing or no. If it doesn't exist, in which case you get a return as a false. The effect as part of the result is to append the tag name into the for the resource that is being reviewed. So here whenever a resource is created or the policy is updated, this particular created on date tag will be checked and added if it doesn't exist. Now let's go ahead and save this policy to get a better understanding of the next steps. So save. Now here I have the policy defined and ready to be assigned and used at various uh, scope levels from management group to resource. So if I go back and refresh, so let me even refresh the page. Sometimes it takes few minutes for the changes to happen. So now here I have the default, the policy that we created previously to add a default tag, say created on, and with the value of the current year uh, as a policy. So as we saw, there's a condition to check whether there is already a tag with the name as created on. If not, the policy would ensure to create a new resource, new tag with the name created on. Now, this is a policy that we've created, but not yet applied to any of the resource. To apply a policy, we need to assign the policy to a particular uh, scope. So I go into assignments and click on assign policy and use again specify the scope and choose the policy that you want to apply for this scope. So again, once we have these policies loaded, I can specify add, and I have the add default tag which was created previously. Now select the default tag, provide a description adding created on tag for the resources. Right? And it takes the name of the logged in user, and then when I click on next, this is where I can select the additional properties or settings with respect to resource. I can apply a condition to add the tag to a particular resource or a resource type or with for a resource in a particular location. So I'll be able to add those selectors, and I can also define maximum of 10 override properties or override effect, which will ensure the condition is overridden even though the tag is not met. Now the next is the parameters. So as we have defined in the parameter in the policy, which is picked up here automatically, I can define the parameters here, the created on and the tag value as the current year. So as we discussed, what I'm trying to do here is every resource that is created, it is assigning the tag created on and a value of the current year 2023. The next task is the remediation. The remediation is, as we understand, is the process where if the compliance is not there, what is the action to be taken? And the next is the non-compliance message. This is basically a user-friendly message that you want to show to the user in case the resource is non-compliant. I would say created on year tag is missing, right? So I'm basically specifying that a particular tag is missing. And finally, I can go ahead and review and create the assignment. Once created, so I have this assignment created, and since we have applied the policy which is the mode is on, the all the existing resource would be checked against this policy, and you will see an updated dashboard in the policy definitions in the dashboard to see the compliance report of the resources. It may take few minutes for the report to come up, but you will ultimately see the compliance and non-compliant. So if you see here, the add default tag via portal, which is a policy we created, it says the not started mode, which means that the policy has been assigned, but it has not yet completed to review the process and review the resource for the conditions of the policy. It would take few minutes for it to refresh and show the resource which are non-compliant. So here I am with the updated dashboard wherein the policy add default tag via the portal is now says non-compliant, and it indicates one of the resource is non-compliant with the report with the tag called creation date. So going into detail of this assignment, you'll be able to see the list of resources that are non-compliant and taken action. Similarly, the events are the event of the non-compliance, which you can process it outside. Now, there are two steps for this. The remediation could be a manual remediation where I can go into the resource, add the tag automatically, and the report would refresh that I'm now compliant. The other option would be to make a remediation task for this particular condition for this particular resource and enable the same. So this is how you would typically create a policy, assign the policy to a particular resource, and then identify the non-compliant resource to and take the appropriate actions uh, to adhere to the policies of the team or the organization. Now let's look at the scenario where uh, how would the policy be applied when a new resource is created in Azure portal. Now this policy, as you remember, is assigned at the is scoped at the subscription level. So any resource that I create in the subscription, uh, this particular policy is applicable. Now, since we have defined the policy as an append, which means that, or which we can expect is whenever a new resource is created, the tag is automatically appended to the new resource. Now let's check this out once. So going back to the storage account, let me create a simple uh, sample storage account to demonstrate the policy. So I'm giving it a name, stage demo uh, for append, and let me select region and say the redundancy is local, and next I'll keep all these default uh, because I may go ahead and delete once we demonstrate this. Now here, either I can add the created on automatically manually here, or let's see if I don't add the tag, how the policy would take the action. Now finally, I do a review to go ahead and create the storage account. So now what is expected out of this is that once the storage is created, the policy is executed. And since we have not defined the tag created on as part of our resource, the policy would take care of appending the tag called created on with the value 2023 into the resource. So once this resource is created, we'll be able to review the final state of the tag and the policy. So now that the resource is created, let me go to resource, and I have all the details of what I specified. And if I go to the tags, you notice the tag created on is automatically created as part of the policy assigned to the subscription level. So effectively, once the policy is assigned and you have the action as an append, any new resource created after the policy is assigned, the required actions and changes would be appended to the resource by the policy. Now, let's quickly look at how to define an initiative or a policy set and assign the same to the scope. So, as we know, an initiative is nothing but a collection of policies grouped together to achieve a common goal. So, if I go back to the definitions and look at the policy definitions, there are two definitions that I have created. One is to add a tag for created on, and the other is to create a tag of when would the resource expire. So the each policy would ensure to assign a tag for created on and assign a tag for expiry, giving the admin an ability to generate a report of all the upcoming resource that either expires or to be reviewed. Now to create an initiative, I click on the initiative definition and choose the scope. In this case, it's my subscription. So, I'll say tag, I can say create expiry initiative, right? And give a description around that. And finally select a category, which I'm saying a governance. And once I say next, it would ask me to select the definitions that should be part of this initiative. So once I say add, I'll again see the list of policies that we saw in the previous screen, and with the ability to choose the same into the initiative. So let me search at portal. So if I do a search for a portal, I should see, let me search for default tag. So this is the one. and the other I have is the expiry. I have the expire tag. Let me add this and now go ahead and add the created on tag. So default tag and add. So here in the initiative I added two policies as part of initiative. I can uh, I can have group them do initiative into different. I can have these parameters uh, related to initiative, right? And also I could have all the tag names and the value that I need. So example, the expiry expires on is uh, the value of the tag, name of the tag, and the value will be 2024 and created on let me give it as a 2023. So it effectively has an year of validity. So once I say next, you get a view of all the settings and click on create. So what it does is it creates initiative with two policies which now can be assigned across the scope. So let's wait for this. So yeah, so here I have the policy definitions. If I select initiative, I should see the new initiative I have created. So it's a created expiry initiative. So now if I go to assignment and click on as sorry, if I go back to assignment and there's an option to assign an initiative. So once I say assign initiative, I can again choose the initiative that I want to assign to a scope. In this case, create create expiry initiative and takes the default name and the details. I can again do the same, select the resource that I want to have, specify the overriding capabilities, what is the remediation to be taken care, and what is the non-compliance message. So the tags are not compliant with organization policy, right? So then I can say next and finally create. So once this policy is also assigned, now I'll start seeing the report of the same in the policy dashboard once the report has been uh, initiated and reviewed. So there's a uh, report of one policy which is non-compliant. So here I have the updated dashboard wherein I can now see the creator expiry initiative, which it says as non-compliant because one of the resource is not having the tag that is needed, the expiry tag. So just similar to policy definitions, if I now go ahead and create a new resource, the two tags created on and expires on would be automatically be added into the resource and make it compliant. And so this is a typical way to how to use an initiative to apply multiple policies across the scope of the subscription resource and ensure the governance, monitoring, and auditing of the resources. Another key aspect of Azure policies is the ability to automate the same using code workflows. Managing governance across a few set of resources might be possible by manually defining the policies, assigning the policy to a particular scope, and ensure compliance on an ongoing basis. The manual approach may not be feasible in a large-scale environment. That's where SDKs are helpful to achieve manageable and repeatable policies at scale. You will be aware of two commonly used process when it comes to software delivery: the infrastructure as a code and the DevOps process. Azure Policies as code combines the two. You will be able to manage the policies via a Git source control, then achieve end-to-end automation of deployment of policies, assignments, and also validation and compliance check in the CI/CD pipelines. We will see a detailed demo and hands-on session on the same in the future sections. So, code workflows in Azure Policies play a key role when you're working on a large-scale infrastructure and ensure compliance across the subscriptions.